Hello, welcome to today's book review. I'm discussing The Descent of Woman, the Classic Study of Evolution by Elaine Morgan. It's written in 1972, and a big part of the book is her discussion of the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis. Today, I'm not going to be discussing that part of it because I want to read her other book that was later written called The Aquatic Ape. But if you want to know, you can look more into it. It's at least very interesting. And basically, it suggests that perhaps humans lived in a semi aquatic environment. We're in the ocean a whole lot more than we thought, and that's why we have many peculiar features such as hairlessness and bipedalism. It kind of gives a parsimonious explanation to many peculiarities about humans and human evolution, and it is, at the very least, very interesting. But what I want to talk about is the main theme of the book, and obviously the title, The Descent of Woman, is a play on The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin's book, that was obviously written about human evolution. And what she's doing is she's offering the female perspective in the discussion of human evolution. She was some things about Elaine Morgan. She was a laywoman. She was not in academia, so she was an outsider. She was born in 1920, and she would describe herself as a feminist. I believe she would be a second wave feminist. And so she had a lot of really good points just discussing human evolution in the context and from the perspective of the female perspective. Traditionally, this was not the case because, at least in her time, most of the evolutionary biologists, they were men. And so they had certain biases, and that kind of precluded them from viewing evolution the way a woman might. I thought it was just incredibly valuable because I haven't seen this perspective before, and it was just at least a great exercise in thought. So to kind of give you a sense of what she's getting at, I'll read a passage here. And it's discussing about, many of the female characteristics that men find attractive. And a lot of the traditional explanations were that, females look that way because they're attractive. And she explains that, quote, "This is essentially a circular argument. I find this attribute sexy. Therefore, it must have evolved in order that I might find it sexy. It's like saying that a woman walks with a wiggle because this is attractive to a male. In fact, she only walks with a wiggle because her children are so intelligent. The necessity of passing a large-skulled infant's head through her pelvic ring has prevented her skeleton from adapting to bipedalism quite as gracefully as that of her brothers, and males only find this defect attractive because they associate it with femininity." Right? So that's a much more rational and reasonable explanation for why males find this particular trait more attractive. Related to that, it helps us to look at human evolution from the perspective not just of the male or the female, but also the offspring. And because women spend a lot more time with the offspring, it's really important to look at that relationship. With this example that she gave, a lot of the, a lot of human evolution is driven by the constraints and the demands of the offspring, not the adults, right? The adults are kind of almost slaves to what the offspring needs. And the human offspring, to be intelligent, it needs a large head. And so for the woman, that means that she, doesn't walk quite as gracefully when she's on two legs as a man does because her hips have to be a certain way. Right? So it's just looking at things from this different perspective was really valuable. And she talks about a lot throughout the book. So she talks about the physical aspects of the human body, human physiology, psychology, human speech, the female orgasm, sex, love, politics, gender dynamics. She talks about gender dynamics, in her present day and how she sees them changing in the near future. And yeah, she talks about kind of she gives a really balanced commentary on the pros and cons of like sexual liberation and changes in gender dynamics that had been happening over the decades. And it's just good to not just look at it from the side of here are all the benefits, or from the side of here are all the consequences, the negative consequences, but to look at both the pros and the cons. And she does a good job with that. As somebody who likes to champion individualism, I really appreciate what she said here. So she's talking in her chapter on primate politics about how oftentimes humans were kind of, they would look at baboons as like a similar species, and it's kind of from a more male perspective because the baboons are very aggressive and they form these groups. Like if a predator comes, the males will get together and they'll face that predator. And then many male evolutionary biologists, they kind of talk about that male bond to get together and face a common enemy, and they talk about the greatness of that. And there is a lot that is great about that aspect of humanity, but she gives a good counterpoint to that is a great point for individualism. She says, actually, no. And some of the greatest men in history have been the ones who echoed that no. Men who have experienced the male bond at its warmest, been embraced as a brother by church or army or establishment, and then found there was a point beyond which they could not conform. They have taken their minds back out of the common pool, and however hysterically the pack yapped and snarled around them, they have resisted the pull of it because they could do no other. That I do see as beautiful. I just think that's an awesome passage for individualism, for the person who does not accept groupthink, who takes their mind back out of the common pool and thinks for themselves and is willing to stand on their own 2 feet for their own beliefs and values. Similarly, in her postscript, she discusses how her book was received by the general public. She talks about how it was quite well received among women; they enjoyed it, but she also talks about how it was received, how academia received it, and as an outsider to academia, she wasn't very welcomed, and she's bringing these completely new ideas that are paradigm shifting, especially in reference to the aquatic ape hypothesis and whether or not it's right. At the time, they weren't giving her arguments, a fair shake. They weren't actually having good discussions about it and explaining why she was wrong, if she was wrong. They were just kind of, shoving her off as, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's not an academic. She's just a laywoman. She's an outsider, right? And she's discussing how scientific ideas, it can be very hard to change people's minds on them. It's not just religious ideas that are hard to change in people. It is also scientific ideas. And she's talking about how, a certain idea with a theory about lichens and how they're a symbiotic organism, how, even that, it's a challenging idea, but it only adds on to scientific knowledge. It doesn't challenge anything at the foundations of it. It doesn't require any large paradigm shift, right? So she says, even so, any resistance to the lichen discovery would have been short-lived, because it was merely adding one more brick to the edifice of accepted scientific knowledge, and no one feels threatened by that. The innovators who really raise hackles are the ones who tell them they have been on the wrong track all their lives. The ones who say, the truth is so simple and obvious that when you hear it, you'll be kicking yourselves for not having seen it sooner. In brackets, in practice, they are much more likely to kick the innovator. This reminds me of Howard Rourke's speech in The Fountainhead when he talks about, how the man who has stood by, on his own and the inventor who has created things for himself, the first man who invented fire, he was probably burned at the stake by his brothers after inventing fire, right? And so this point about how they should be kicking themselves because they didn't think of what was obvious. Instead, they kick the innovator who thinks about it and points it out to them, right? People do not like to have their fundamental beliefs challenged. We all know this, and yeah, she wrote it so well. I think that's all I kind of want to discuss. Again, I'm not going to discuss the aquatic ape hypothesis part of it, but it is really interesting, and I'll discuss it more in the future. So thanks for listening. If you've read the book or if you have any thoughts on it, let me know what you think in the comments. It's definitely an interesting book if you're interested in like human evolution, and if you're interested in like kind of more, it's somewhat far out there, but it's definitely reasonable. It's not crazy or like mystical or anything. It's different. But whether she's right or not about the aquatic ape hypothesis, and actually I should say she did not come up with the aquatic ape hypothesis. She was just its biggest proponent. Sir Alistair Hardy was a marine biologist, and he came up with it, but he wasn't a very big proponent of it. I think he was quite sheepish about it, and so she became the hypothesis's biggest proponent. So that was interesting. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.